Amboseli National Park, mid-morning. The dust shifted without warning as a young female elephant stumbled from the acacia line and fell onto her side near the ranger's vehicle. Her breath hit the earth in broken puffs, ribs lifting then dropping without rhythm. The impact kicked up dry soil that hung briefly in the air before settling across her flanks like ash. Her front legs folded unnaturally beneath her, and her tusks carved shallow lines into the hardpan where she landed. A second shape stepped forward, smaller, thinner, no taller than the vehicle's hood, a calf. It did not cry out or retreat. It just stood there, shaking. The calf's ears fanned and folded against its skull, tail swishing once, then still. The folds of its skin were cracked with dry mud. It took one hesitant step forward, then another, and pressed the tip of its trunk into the hollow between the mother's eyes. There was no answer. The body beneath it did not stir, only released a long, faint exhale. Flies gathered at the edges of her wounds, small crusted abrasions along her legs and spine, likely from days of collapse and rise before this one final stop. The calf turned its head slightly, watching the rangers without blinking, its sides heaving. Lima, the lead ranger that day, radioed once for backup but kept his voice low. He knew any sudden noise could spook the calf into flight, or worse, into reckless defense. They'd seen it before. Calves who lost their mothers too young sometimes ran toward vehicles, mistaking threat for solution. Lima raised a hand to the others. No movement, no approach. He stepped from the jeep only after the dust settled. Slowly, boots careful not to crunch gravel, he moved around the far side of the vehicle, placing it between himself and the young one. The air was hot, the kind that thickens around skin. Above, vultures wheeled in wide spirals, distant but watching. Time pressed inward. If the mother was in shock, every minute mattered. If she was bleeding internally, there might be no minutes left. The calf circled her now, touching her trunk, then backing away in short, uncertain motions. Its eyes were glassy, too wide, as if trying to keep the whole scene in view at once. Lima crouched beside the jeep, sweat dripping from his brow, and whispered, "Easy now. We're not here to harm." But words meant nothing here. What mattered was the quiet. What mattered was stillness. The calf's next movement broke it. It stepped closer to the mother's side and let out a low, pulsing rumble. Not loud, not long, just enough to carry into the space between them. Then silence again. No reply came. The mother's chest barely lifted now. Her ears had stopped moving. Flies clung without being flicked away. Her body was still warm, but that would not last long under this sun. Lima gave a small nod to the team. Water would be needed, shade if possible, but not yet. Not until the calf allowed it. If they moved too soon, they'd risk pushing it into panic. If they waited too long, they might lose the mother entirely. The stakes are balanced on timing. She could be minutes from death or hours. The calf might defend her or abandon her. No one could predict what came next. And still, the calf didn't run. It stood its ground beside her collapsed form, its small trunk resting on the curve of her leg. That stillness carried more weight than movement. It was not surrender. It was waiting, a decision not yet made. Behind the rangers, the wind stirred the grass in uneven bursts. Somewhere far off, another elephant called rose, faint, distant, unsure. But here in the open track, only the calf remained steady, and the mother did not rise. The sun had climbed higher, drawing sharp lines across the cracked earth of Amboseli's open track. The mother still had not moved. Her chest rose just enough to stir the dust beneath her. But her limbs remained folded and motionless. Beside her, the calf began pacing tight circles. Its feet struck the dry soil with restless energy, each step shallow and erratic. It paused only to nudge her ear or trunk, then resumed again. pacing, pausing, nudging. Small, frightened rumbles escaped from its throat, not the calls of summoning, but of confusion. Lima had seen protective behavior in older calves before, but never quite like this. The young one, barely tall enough to reach his shoulder, was acting with a kind of desperate precision, watching every move the humans made. Each time someone reached for a medical pack or shifted their stance, the calf turned abruptly to face them. Its small ears spread, trunk swinging low but alert. It made no direct threat, but it blocked their line every time someone tried to take a step forward. One of the younger rangers whispered, "She won't let us near." Lima raised his hand again, quiet and slow. "We wait. Let her choose." The calf was not yet old enough to survive alone, but old enough to understand what could be lost. It moved now to the far side of the body and pressed itself against the mother's side, its trunk reaching to where her heartbeat might still be felt. She stirred slightly, a shallow twitch of skin beneath her ribs. The calf reacted instantly, nudging again with urgency. When there was no further response, it stepped forward again, placing its body firmly between the rangers and the fallen form. If they pushed forward, she might charge. It wouldn't be a clean rush, more panic than power, but it could result in injury, to her or to them. And if they hesitated too long, the mother's breathing might slip into stillness. Either path held risk. The team stayed in the shadow of the jeep, watching, waiting, the air around them thick and unmoving. The calf gave another low rumble, softer this time. Then it stepped forward and lifted its trunk, not in aggression, but in warning. Lima met its eyes, not as a challenge but as a signal. He crouched lower beside the wheel of the jeep, his movements deliberate, grounding himself in the dust. From his position, he slowly unscrewed the top of a small canteen and poured a thin stream of water into the basin beside him. The sound was barely audible, but the calf's head turned at once. It took 2 steps forward, curious, cautious, but stopped short. Lima did not move. The calf flicked its tail once and stepped back toward its mother. Its pacing began again, this time wider, slower, more fatigued. Its movements had started to lose their sharpness. The energy that had carried it through the morning was now fading into heat and dust. The mother shifted slightly again. Her trunk flexed, lifting a few inches before falling limp once more. A thin layer of foam had gathered at the edges of her mouth, dry and white against her gray skin. She needed water. She needed care, but none of it could happen unless the calf allowed them in. Lima whispered again, "We're not your enemy." But no step followed. The calf stood beside its mother once more, body angled outward like a shield too small for the task. Still, it held its place. Still, it would not leave. Time was tightening around them. Every minute that passed without action risked the mother's life. But every wrong move risked breaking the fragile line of trust the calf had yet to offer. And so, for now, they waited. The basin scraped softly against the ground as Ranger Lima placed it down with both hands, careful not to let the metal clang against stone. He had moved no closer than 3 meters, kneeling low in the shade of the jeep, body still, breath measured. The calf had watched every second. Its eyes were dark and unblinking. Head tilted just enough to keep both Lima and the mother in view. A thin breeze moved through the scrub, lifting dust into the basin's clean surface before the first pour. Lima twisted the cap slowly and tilted the canteen. The stream of water fell with a soft patter, catching sunlight as it pooled into the shallow dish. The calf did not move. It stood as it had for over an hour now. Half-turned, legs slightly spread, trunk curled loosely beneath its jaw. The heat shimmered across its back. Its ears hung limp at the sides, no longer flicking. There was fatigue now in its posture, the kind that comes not only from hunger or thirst but from trying to hold off the inevitable. Lima capped the bottle and sat back slightly on his heels, leaving the basin where it was. No coaxing, no call, just presence. Behind him, one ranger adjusted the radio, whispering that backup had reached the southern road but would wait for signal. There was no point in bringing more bodies too close. The calf was the gatekeeper now. Every next step had to come from her. Minutes passed. Then the calf stirred. It stepped forward, just one pace, and paused, its trunk twitching at the tip. The sound of water, still fresh in the air, had not been lost on it. It lowered its head and sniffed the basin, then flicked its trunk once over the rim, splashing a few drops out. Still, it didn't drink. Its gaze returned to the mother. Her body had not moved in some time. Her breathing was shallow. Each rise of her chest thinner than the last. The foam at her mouth had begun to crust. And then, without sound, without signal, the calf moved again. It reached out with its trunk, hooked it lightly around the edge of the basin, and pulled. Not away. Toward her. The motion was unsteady, not smooth, a drag, then a shove. The basin tipped once, water sloshing over the lip, but did not spill entirely. Inch by inch, the calf shifted it forward until it lay just beside the mother's mouth. Then the calf stepped back and stood still. Lima did not move. No one did. A breath passed. Then two. The mother stirred. Not much, the smallest tilt of her jaw, the faintest lift of her trunk. Her tongue moved once, slow and dry. One edge of the basin caught it. Water touched skin. Not enough to drink, but enough to taste, enough to register. She did not rise. She could not, but she had responded. Lima exhaled slowly. That was the beginning they needed. Not hope, not safety, but proof she was still there. The calf stepped closer and laid its trunk gently along her side. Its body trembled with the effort of standing. It had not eaten in at least a day. I had not drank since this morning. Still, it had chosen her first. The basin sat now beneath the faint shadow of her jaw. One more inch, and she might reach it fully. One more hour, and she might not. The calf didn't know the stakes in numbers or time, only in presence, only in proximity. And with all it had, it stayed. The first shadow passed over the earth without sound. Then another. By mid-afternoon, a ring of vultures had begun to form in the sky. Slow, measured spirals above the open track. Their wings barely moved, riding thermals in long circles that tightened each time the wind calmed. Lima looked up once, squinting. Too many. Too soon. He knew what they saw. Stillness, distance, no movement from the mother elephant for over an hour now. To them, it was the beginning of loss. The calf raised its head, its ears flared, tail stiff. The tremble in its limbs remained, but something deeper surfaced, an alertness that hadn't shown before. It scanned the sky, stepped around its mother's side, and lifted its trunk toward the open air. The vultures dipped slightly as if testing their luck, but the calf did not retreat. Instead, it made a sound. The trumpet that came from its throat was too loud for its size, raw and high, an unpracticed call bursting from its chest without form, but it cut through the dry air, bouncing off the scrub and silencing even the insects for a moment. Lima flinched. He'd never heard a calf that young call with such force. The vultures scattered, startled, their pattern broken. For now, the calf turned and stood facing outward, placing itself between the fallen body and the sky. It shifted weight from one foot to the other, unsettled but grounded. This was not the stance of a lost child anymore. It was a line, a barrier drawn by instinct. No herd had arrived, no mother had risen, but something in the calf refused to yield. Lima watched from the jeep's shadow, crouched low. The radio clicked softly, a voice asking whether to advance. He didn't answer. If they moved now, they risked changing the calf's posture. She had drawn an invisible circle around the mother, and for now, even the sky responded to it. The dust settled again. insects buzzed at the edges of the heat. The vultures regrouped at a higher altitude, circling slower this time, not gone, just waiting. A few landed on trees beyond the clearing, hunched like silent judges watching the last breath of a fading trial. But the calf never looked away. It shifted position slightly, angling one side of its body to cover more of the mother's exposed flank. Its trunk swept low over her ear. No movement. Still no drink. Still no rise. Lima leaned forward and murmured to no one, "She's doing what a herd would do. Not with strength, not with size, but with presence." That's what mattered now. Elephants did not leave them dying. They circled, they were touched, they stayed. And here, alone, the calf was holding the pattern, defending something it barely understood, the space between breath and absence. If the vultures returned, she would face them again. If the mother stirred, she would be there to guide her back. But if nothing changes... Lima didn't finish the thought. There was still breath. There was still a calf who refused to move. The sun tilted westward, casting long shadows from the vehicle and brush. The heat did not lift. The vultures waited, but so did the calf. And in that silence her small, fragile body drew a line between death and defiance. Not with force, but with refusal. She would not let go. Not yet. The sun pressed down heavier by late afternoon, turning the soil pale and brittle beneath the calf's feet. Her shadow stretched thin beside the motionless body of her mother. She had not moved from her post. Not when the wind picked up. Not when the vultures circled again. Not even when her legs began to tremble more from fatigue than fear. Then, from beyond the far ridge, a sound carried low through the valley, the faint, rolling murmur of elephant calls. It was not loud or urgent, but layered and deep, the kind that traveled far without effort. The calf's ears flicked once, her head tilted, but she did not turn away. Another call came, clearer this time. Then silence. Lima stood at the edge of the jeep's shade, listening. He had heard the same rhythm before. Not alarm, not summoning. A different tone altogether. A matriarch's low-contact call, slow and spaced, meant to signal peace. It did not ask for a return. It simply said, "We are near." The calf swayed once, then steadied herself. From the southern grove came the first movement. A shape large and steady emerged between the trees, walking slowly without sound. A matriarch, wide-backed and dark with dust. Behind her followed 3 others, 1 older female and 2 juveniles. They moved in a loose formation, heads low, trunks brushing the ground occasionally as they advanced. No panic, no rush. They had heard. The calf held her place, facing forward. Her trunk lay curled at her mother's side, her feet motionless. The approaching herd slowed as they neared the clearing. The matriarch paused 30 meters away. She did not call again. She did not trumpet. She simply waited, ears out, eyes locked on the young one standing guard. Lima said nothing. His team didn't shift. This was not theirs to interrupt. The calf stepped once toward them, then stopped. It was not hesitation. It was recognition. Not all calves responded to herd calls, but this one had spent long months in the periphery of a greater family. She remembered something in their posture, in their silence, in the space they left open. The matriarch moved first, one slow step forward, then another. When she was just beyond reach, she stopped again and extended her trunk low and close to the dust, not toward the calf, but beside her. An offering of scent, not demand. The calf did not retreat. She looked back once at her mother, then faced forward again, breathing slow. The older female behind the matriarch lifted her head slightly, then dipped it again. The youngest of the group shifted closer, keeping her flank in line with the matriarch's, mirroring each movement. The air between them held. Tension softened into distance, not bridged, not forced. If they meant to claim the calf, they would have stepped closer. If they meant to mourn, they would have surrounded the body. But they didn't do either. They simply came and stood, 4 elephants forming a quiet perimeter at the edge of the clearing. The calf remained still, body bowed but unbroken, standing as the only one who could decide what happened next. In the heat, no wind stirred. The vultures had vanished. The basin of water sat still, untouched since morning. But something had shifted. Not a rescue, not a recovery, a gathering, and in that space, not forced by humans, not chased by time, a single calf stood between past and future, holding to the only truth she had left. Her mother, her post, and now, the silent arrival of those who remembered. The matriarch moved with no urgency, only gravity. Her feet sank into the dry soil with each step, leaving wide, deliberate impressions behind her. The dust shifted around her ankles and settled in her creases, softening the outline of her massive frame. The calf watched her approach without flinching, though her body leaned deeper into her mother's side, as if unsure how much more she could hold. The matriarch stopped just short of touching them, her trunk suspended in the warm air, swaying faintly like a breath waiting to be taken. Then, gently, she reached forward. Her trunk passed over the calf's back without touching it and lowered toward the mother's brow. She touched once, a brief contact just above the eye, and lifted. Then again, slower this time, with the weight of recognition. The calf stirred beneath her, a low rumble building in her chest, but it did not rise. It stayed coiled, a vibration of grief or memory, no one could say. The matriarch held her place, then stepped back. One by one, the others followed. The second female came forward next, brushing her trunk across the mother's spine, a long motion that ended near the flank where dust had begun to settle in the folds of the skin. Then the 2 younger elephants stepped in opposite arcs, forming the beginnings of a circle. Their heads dipped as they moved. No sound came from any of them, only the quiet scuff of feet pressing into the earth. When the circle closed, it was not tight. It allowed for space. The calf remained inside it, pressed now fully into the curve of her mother's belly, her body sinking into the side that still rose, but only just. Her trunk slid beneath her, curled awkwardly beneath one foreleg, as if sheltering herself from a truth too large. The matriarch lowered her head again and released a long, low rumble, a sound that vibrated through the clearing without rising in volume, a frequency more than a voice. The others responded in turn, each call layering over the last, not in mourning, but in presence. Lima had stepped back now, out of view. There was no need for human interference. What was happening belonged to them. These gestures, these rituals, they were not reactions. They were memories. Elephants remembered their dead. They returned to their bones. They paused at places where herd members had fallen, but rarely did they arrive in time to stand at the moment of passing. If this was goodbye, it was being written in silence. The calf lifted her head briefly and placed her trunk across her mother's mouth. No breath met it, but still she held there. Still she waited. The sun tilted further west, drawing long shadows across the elephants' bodies. Their circle remained unbroken. The vultures had moved on, their patience outmatched. The air was still. Not a wind moved the trees in the distance. Time stretched into something beyond measure. Not fast, not slow, simply held. And in that space the mother lay unmoving, her calf curled against her, the herd standing sentinel. No drama, no display, just presence. If the matriarch had come to lead the calf away, she had not done so. If she had come to witness an ending, she had now seen it. And yet no one moved. The circle held. Because sometimes elephants do not leave the dying. Sometimes they stay until there is nothing left but stillness, or until stillness turns. The heat clung low in the clearing, pressing a heavy stillness over the scene. The circle of elephants stood motionless, their massive frames casting wide shadows across the dust. At the center, the calf remained curled against her mother, one foreleg folded awkwardly, her eyes half-lidded from exhaustion. No one moved, not the matriarch, not the younger elephants, not the rangers watching from a distance, hands lowered, voices stilled. The earth itself seemed to pause. Then the calf shifted. It wasn't sudden. Just the quiet tilt of her weight, the lifting of her head. Her trunk uncurled slowly from beneath her leg and reached forward through the dust. For a long moment, she rested it against her mother's still side. Then she stood, shaky, unsure, and turned. The matriarch watched her, but did not step in. The calf walked slowly toward her, feet dragging slightly, her body marked with streaks of dried dirt and sun-warmed sweat. When she reached the edge of the matriarch's massive foreleg, she lifted her trunk and brushed it lightly across the elder's own. Not a greeting of play or joy, a gesture of asking, of needing. The matriarch lowered her head just slightly, letting the contact linger. Then the calf moved to the next elephant in the line. This one, a smaller female, lowered her trunk before the calf even reached her, allowing the touch to happen on equal ground. The calf's movements were slow, deliberate, the way elephants greet when words are not enough. When bonds are tested not by presence, but by pain. She moved again, to the youngest of the herd, a juvenile not much older than herself. They touched only briefly, a simple crossing of trunks like passing a thought from one mind to another. Then to the final adult, the largest besides the matriarch, whose deep rumble vibrated softly through the ground as the calf approached. She stood still and let the calf press her trunk gently against her jaw. 4 elephants, 4 moments, not dominance. Not claiming, just contact me. Then, as quietly as she had begun, the calf turned and walked back to where her mother lay. The herd did not follow. She stepped around her mother's flank and stopped at her head, where the basin of water still sat, now half emptied by evaporation and dust. She didn't look at it. Instead, she placed her trunk once more over her mother's, lifting it gently from where it lay in the dirt. It dangled slightly, limp but warm. The calf held it there. Suspended between them, there was no response, but she held it anyway. For a long time, nothing else happened. The circle remained. The wind did not rise, the dust did not shift. It was as if the entire valley held its breath. Lima watched from the ridge. She asked them, he murmured, barely above the dry air. She asked each one. It was not a farewell. Not yet. The calf had not left her place, but she had done something more than wait. She had reached. She had asked for something only they could give, memory, company, belonging, and now she held her mother's trunk like it still meant something, because it did. The shadows stretched long across the clearing, their edges softening in the sinking light. The heat had begun to loosen, though the dust still clung to skin and tusk, thick along the ruts in the earth. The herd stood quietly where they had formed their circle, unmoving now for nearly an hour. Nothing rushed, nothing stirred. The calf, small and dusted, leaned once more into her mother's side, her legs trembling from the weight of waiting. Then a breath. Not the shallow whisper of earlier, but a fuller pull. Slow, deeper, drawn from somewhere farther inside. The calf froze. Her ears twitched sharply. The matriarch did not react, but her gaze shifted downward. Then the mother's trunk flexed, just barely. It lifted an inch from the dirt before falling again. Not limp, but alive. Not strength yet, just signal. Lima stepped forward from his crouch behind the jeep, but stopped short. No words, no motion. He watched. The calf stepped back, giving space as if instinctively sensing what came next. Her body rocked slightly, tail swaying once in a loose arc. The mother's head tilted, and for a moment it seemed she might roll further into the dust. But she didn't. Her legs began to shift. First the front, then the rear. Staggered, slow, bones straining beneath skin. Then, impossibly, she rose. One leg pressed into the earth, then another. Her body lifted in increments, wavering with each shift of weight. Dust poured from her flanks as she stood, like ash falling from a structure long unmoved. Her ribs flared with each breath, nostrils wide, trunk curling low and loose. The calf took one step closer, brushing her trunk along her mother's knee. No trumpet came. No roar of recovery, only the sound of breathing. 2 rhythms now, not one. The matriarch stepped forward at a single pace, then stopped. The mother did not stumble. She stood, barely, but fully upright now, her eyes half-lidded, her body slumped with exhaustion. But she was not on the ground. And the calf, who had waited through heat, hunger, and silence, pressed against her gently, touching shoulder to leg, as if to remind her she had not been alone. Lima whispered, "She's standing." The basin still lay in the dust nearby, tipped but not empty. No one moved toward it. The moment didn't ask for more. What had needed to happen had happened. The herd began to shift now, not with urgency, but with readiness. The younger elephants turned toward the south grove. The older female stepped aside, opening space. The matriarch lifted her trunk once, not calling, not commanding, and turned toward the shaded ridge. An exit, not an ending. The mother took one step, wobbled, found balance, then another. The calf stayed at her side, not guiding, not pushing, just beside her, as she had always been. Together, they moved toward the edge of the clearing, flanked now by giants who had watched and waited, but never interfered. No dramatic reunion, no triumphant chorus. Just the quiet miracle of a body that rose because it was not abandoned. Behind them, the clearing emptied. The dust settled. The basin lay still beneath the falling light. And the soft sound of 2 hearts moving again filled the space where silence had once been.